And as Trump continues his 2024 campaign, it seems like not a day passes when he's relitigating what happened in 2020 or January 6th and beyond. It's a topic of a brand new book. My guest tonight is the author of Trump in Exile. It's already topping bestseller lists. Meridith McGraw is up late with me tonight here on the Final Five. Good to see you tonight, Meridith. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here.
Exile is not something we normally associate with American presidents or former American presidents, but it seems like for a while that's what Donald Trump was doing after his loss and when he left the White House.
Yeah, Donald Trump had a very unorthodox post-presidency, and that's for a few reasons. First, him refusing to accept the results of the 2020 election, but also for starting to strategize his own comeback and his own third presidential run for 2024. And when he first left Washington, D.C., it was right after January 6th. He refused to attend President Biden's inauguration. And a lot of Republican leadership were pretty pleased with seeing him go. And there were a lot of doubts about what his political future would look like. But over the course of his time at Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster, over the 2 years that I chronicled in this book, he really built out a political apparatus, and there were a few key moments that really propelled him to get to where we are, where Trump is now the Republican nominee once again for president.
You talk in the book about not just Trump, but the people around him and the inner circle, which the faces have changed quite a bit over the years. But when you look at everything that was coming into Trump world, whether it be the legal investigations or whatever actions the U.S. government was looking to take against him, I mean, there was a lot of discord on that side too about the best path forward.
Yeah, Donald Trump has always kept a group of people around him who don't always see eye to eye on what the strategy should be and what he should do to move forward. One of the things I really recount in this book is his endorsements in the 2022 midterm elections. And some of the advisors that were working for Donald Trump were also, of course, political consultants, and they were working for candidates who were seeking out Donald Trump's endorsements. So they had their own different ideas of who he should pick. But even when it comes to how Trump should have responded to the National Archives and their quest to get the classified documents back, there were different voices within Trump's inner circle who some were telling him to fight back, that he had every right to hold on to these documents, and others recognized that it was a more serious event. And so there's always been competing voices. Some win out, some don't. But that's also just sort of the nature of Trump and the company that he keeps.
When you mention about the endorsements, there's been this talk in the American media about who carries the mantle of Trumpism or MAGA or whatever you want to call it moving forward. But there was a moment where the former president thought that this would sort of stay in the family, where he was looking to kind of empower Don Jr. to play more of a role in this movement.
Well, Don Jr., after Trump left the White House, just had a natural interest in politics. Some of Trump's other kids, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, they went back to New York and Miami, and they wanted to start their life, get their life back from where they were before the White House and have their own business ventures. Eric Trump has always been really involved with the Trump organization, and Donald Trump Jr. is too, but he really has become a bigger figure on the right. And one of the important roles that he played in this time period that I report on is behind the scenes, guiding some of Trump's political decisions, including his decision to endorse J.D. Vance in Ohio, who went on to win the Senate race there and is now Donald Trump's running mate.
And when you talk about the endorsements, it also speaks to the people he was endorsing against. And when you look at some of the names through time, whether it be Liz Cheney, who was primaried and lost, I mean, these were victories that I would imagine the former president saw as maybe some sort of precursor to what may be, because his supporters, if he tells them, hey, this is who I want to carry the mantle, they're going to show up in force and back him.
Well, defeating Liz Cheney was such a priority for Donald Trump and the people around him after he left the White House. Liz Cheney was the biggest voice on Capitol Hill for Republicans to move on from Trump and for him to face consequences for what happened on January 6th. And Trump was really determined to make sure that she did not win her seat again in Wyoming. And so it really was an all hands on deck effort there, but also in races for the other House members who impeached Trump. Trump wanted to make sure that he sent a message there with really mobilizing people to defeat them. And that was a big priority for him. And, for his campaign, they recognized that if they lost some of those races, it would show that Trump was vulnerable. They obviously didn't want that. And so that became, a big priority for them.
By the way, timing is everything, Meredith. I mean, you couldn't have picked a better time for this book to come out and this look at Donald Trump and where he's been and where he wants to go. Meredith McGraw, the book is called Trump in Exile. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And the Final Five is back after this.